All right, everyone, get ready, because today we are taking a deep dive into the Target boycott that's been all over the news.
Ooh, this is a big one.
It is. It is. We're talking about their decision to kind of scale back on some of their DEI policies.
Right, those diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives.
Yeah, the ones aimed at making a more inclusive workplace, for everybody.
Makes sense.
And our main source for this deep dive is a fascinating report from KRRN4.
Okay.
And get this boycott, it's been going on for 40 days now.
Wow, that's a long time.
I know, it's serious stuff, and people are really fired up about it.
I bet. It feels like this could have a ripple effect way beyond Target itself,
It totally could, and what's really got me thinking is how this whole thing brings up some really big questions.
Like what?
Well, what's the role of businesses in society these days?
Mm-hmm.
And do consumers actually have a say?
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's not just a Target issue, is it? It's like this bigger conversation about corporate social responsibility.
Exactly. And this KRRN4 report, they spotlight this one shopper, David Dolman.
Okay.
And he is so committed to this boycott that he's actually changed where he shops for the past 40 days.
Wow. So he's not just talking the talk.
No, he's walking the walk. He's going out of his way to support businesses that actually, align with his own values.
It's a powerful statement for sure. It's like, are we seeing a shift or something where people are really putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak?
Right, and it makes you wonder, how are companies responding to this shift? Because think about it, Target was super vocal in their support of the George Floyd protests.
Right, a few years back.
Yeah, and they've even launched initiatives to support Black-owned businesses.
Interesting. So they've kind of already positioned themselves as an ally.
Yeah, which is why this is so fascinating. On the one hand, they're all about these social justice causes, but then they scale back on DEI efforts.
So there's a bit of a disconnect there, right?
Totally. So what's driving this, right? Is this a case of woke washing, like some people are saying?
Woke washing.
Where companies basically make these big gestures of support, but don't really follow through with action.
Yeah, woke washing is a tricky one. It's not always about, bad intentions or anything. Sometimes companies really think they're doing the right thing, but then they run into, pressure.
Pressure from?
Well, it could be internal pressure, like from within the company, or even external pressure, from outside forces.
I see.
So they might kind of get forced to change course. And then the challenge for consumers is trying to figure out what's real and what's just for show.
And how do you even do that? I mean, it seems like every company is trying to appeal to, the social conscious consumer these days.
Oh, for sure.
But how can we tell if they're actually walking the walk or just talking the talk?
It's tough, and it requires some critical thinking from us as consumers. We got to look beyond the surface, dig a little deeper.
Deeper into what, exactly?
Well, into a company's track record, their policies, their overall behavior, not just what they say,
So it's like being a detective almost.
Yeah, kind of. You got to look for clues, and also be aware that companies can be, manipulative. They know how to play on our emotions.
That's true. And this KRN4 report, they talk about another shopper, a pregnant woman.
Right.
And she feels really uncomfortable shopping at Target now because of this whole policy change.
I can understand that.
But here's the thing. She kind of relies on Target for certain products, for her daughter and her baby on the way.
Right. So she's in a tough spot.
It's a difficult position to be in for sure. Her personal needs are kind of clashing with her desire to support businesses that reflect her values,
Absolutely. It's a classic dilemma, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes boycotting a company, even if they're doing something you disagree with, isn't always an option.
Yeah, for her, maybe there aren't other stores that are as accessible or have the specific things she needs.
Exactly. So what do you do then?
Yeah, what's the answer? How do we as consumers navigate these situations?
I don't think there's an easy answer, but I think a good starting point is awareness, asking ourselves those tough questions, really understanding how complex these issues are.
Good point. And speaking of complexity, this report also touches on the economic side of this whole boycott.
Like the impact it's having.
Yeah, Target actually reported a dip in sales back in February.
Oh, wow. So it is hitting them.
It seems like it is, at least in the short term. And now there's all this debate about whether it'll actually affect their bottom line in the long run.
Interesting. This kind of brings us to the idea of voting with your wallet,
That's a classic one.
It's been around forever, but it seems to be gaining traction lately. Consumers are realizing that their choices, they have power.
They really do.
And they can use that power to influence how companies behave.
So are we seeing a resurgence of consumer activism, you think? Is this boycott a sign that people are more willing to hold companies accountable for what they do?
I think there's definitely a growing awareness of the impact of our choices, that's for sure. And this Target thing, yeah, it could be part of a bigger trend.
Yeah, it feels like it. And, history's full of successful consumer boycotts, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Lots of them driven by this desire for social change.
What makes a boycott successful, though? What are the ingredients, so to speak?
Well, a few things. First, you need a lot of people on board, a critical mass. If it's just a handful of people, it's not going to hurt the company's bottom line.
Right, gotta hit them where it hurts.
Exactly. And then media coverage is huge. You need to get the word out, keep the pressure on.
So it's not enough to just have people quietly boycotting. You need to make some noise.
Yeah, got to make it public. And then the company has to be vulnerable to that pressure, They have to feel like if they don't change, they'll lose more than they gain.
So it's a combination of factors coming together.
Yeah, it's got to be the right mix for it to really work.
So back to this David Dolman guy and his 40-day boycott. This KRON4 report, it really emphasizes how committed he is to making a difference. He even has a meeting planned with Target's board.
Wow, after the 40 days are up.
Yeah, that's the plan.
That's pretty impressive. It just goes to show, that individual actions, when they're amplified and combined with other people's efforts, can have an impact.
Yeah, it brings it back to that whole idea of corporate social responsibility, right? What's the role of businesses in society, and how can we hold them accountable? This whole Target situation is a perfect example of those questions playing out in real life, isn't it?
It is. And there aren't any easy answers, that's for sure.
Nope. So we talked about David Dolman and voting with your wallet, but this report also digs into why some companies are actually scaling back on their DEI efforts.
Oh, interesting. So, what are their reasons?
Well, get this. It mentions the influence of orders from the Trump administration.
Wait, really? Even though Target's a private company?
Yeah, apparently so. Which raises the question, how much influence should the government have on private businesses?
That's a tough one. You could argue that businesses should be free to make their own decisions, right?
Yeah, you could.
But then again, the government also has a responsibility to make sure things are fair and to protect people's rights.
It's like a balancing act, isn't it?
It totally is. Finding that sweet spot between government regulation and, letting companies do their own thing.
Yeah, it's tricky. And then this whole debate, it goes beyond just DEI policies, right? We see it with environmental stuff, labor laws, all sorts of things.
Absolutely. It's a constant tension, figuring out where to draw the line.
It feels like this Target boycott is just scratching the surface when it comes to these bigger conversations about corporate social responsibility, consumer activism, and the government's role.
I think you're right. It's like opening a can of worms, but in a good way. It's making us really grapple with some important questions about how we want businesses to operate in our society.
So much to think about.
A lot to unpack, for sure.
It is. And there's even more to explore. We're going to dig even deeper into this Target boycott, the whole DEI thing, and how the relationship between consumers and corporations is changing.
Sounds good. I'm ready for more.
So before we were talking about government influence on company policies, even private ones like Target, it seems like they're facing pressure from all sides. This KRON4 report mentions something called the Latino Freeze movement.
Oh, yeah, I heard about that.
And they've been asking shoppers to avoid stores like Target since last month.
It seems like Target is really navigating a complex landscape right now, huh?
Yeah.
With concerns coming from different groups, it really highlights how important it is to understand different perspectives and the impact these corporate decisions have on different communities.
It's true. This whole situation is like watching a case study unfold in real time, How do these big companies balance all these different interests and expectations while also trying to, keep their business goals in mind? It's kind of fascinating.
It's a tough balancing act for sure. And I bet other companies are watching this Target situation closely, especially those facing similar challenges with DEI. It's a bit like a high-stakes chess game, Every move could have huge consequences.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned earlier how a boycott's success relies on things like public participation and media attention. Do you think this Target boycott has the potential to actually create lasting change?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's still early, but the fact that Target sales have already dipped, that suggests they're feeling the pressure. And all the media coverage, that keeps the issue front and center, which could make the boycott even more impactful.
It's definitely got people talking, that's for sure.
Yeah, and that sustained attention, that can be a powerful force for change, Just look at social media these days. It's become a platform for organizing, amplifying voices, holding those in power accountable.
That's true. Speaking of accountability, let's circle back to DEI initiatives for a sec. We've been talking about the pushback, but what about the good stuff? The potential benefits.
Oh yeah, that's an important point. When DEI is done right, it can lead to a more inclusive and representative workforce, which can actually lead to more innovation, creativity, better decisions overall. It's about creating a workplace where everyone feels valued and respected, and everyone feels empowered to actually contribute their talents.
Yeah, that makes sense. The more diverse the group of people, the wider the range of perspectives and ideas you get.
Exactly. And there's research that shows that companies with diverse leadership teams and workforces, they tend to do better than the companies that aren't as diverse. It's not just about doing the right thing, it's actually smart business.
Interesting. I'm curious, what are some of the biggest challenges that companies face when they're trying to actually implement these DEI initiatives?
Well, one of the toughest things is overcoming those deeply ingrained biases and systemic barriers that have existed for so long. It takes a real commitment to change, not just policies, but the whole culture of an organization. And that can take a long time and be really difficult.
So it's not enough to just write a new policy and call it a day. You got to get to the root of the problem.
Exactly. It requires constant education, training, open conversations. And it's about creating a culture where people are held accountable for their actions.
That makes sense. This KR-4 report doesn't go too deep into the specifics of Target's DEI policies, but it does mention that they've gotten criticism before for not supporting LGBTQ plus employees and customers enough.
Yeah, that's a valid point. DEI has to be intersectional, meaning it needs to address the needs and experiences of all marginalized groups. It's not just about race or gender. It's about understanding how different forms of oppression connect and working to dismantle the systems that keep those inequalities in place.
So it's really about creating an environment that's truly inclusive for everyone, no matter their race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, anything that might make them feel excluded.
Exactly. It's about creating a sense of belonging for everyone.
So let's say a company is really committed to DEI, they're serious about it. What are some actual steps they can take to make a difference?
Well, it starts with really taking a good look at what they're doing now and figuring out what needs to change. They might review their hiring process, training programs, promotion policies to make sure they're fair and inclusive.
So kind of like taking inventory, figuring out where the gaps are.
Exactly. And then they need to set clear goals and figure out how to track their progress. That could mean setting targets for diversity representation at different levels of the company, or measuring how satisfied employees are and how engaged they are, especially within different demographic groups.
So not just making vague promises, but actually having a plan and measuring the results.
Right. Accountability is key. And being transparent, sharing data openly, and communicating progress regularly, that builds trust.
What about training and development? How important are those for creating a more inclusive workplace?
Training is super important. It helps people become aware of unconscious biases, microaggressions, and those other subtle forms of discrimination that can fly under the radar but still perpetuate inequality. It's about giving people the tools to create a more respectful and inclusive work environment.
So it's about helping people recognize their own biases and giving them the confidence to call out bad behavior when they see it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's about creating a space where people feel comfortable having those tough conversations and giving each other feedback. DEI is a journey, not a destination, right?
Wow.
It takes a willingness to learn and grow and adapt.
So it's about creating a culture where everyone is always learning and trying to improve.
That's a great way to put it. And it takes buy-in from everyone, from the top down.
I'm sure there are some companies out there that are really killing it with DEI. What can other businesses learn from them?
That's a great question. There are definitely some companies that are doing amazing work in this area. One thing they all have in common is strong leadership commitment. Their leaders prioritize DEI not just with their words, but with their actions and with how they allocate resources.
It's like they say actions speak louder than words.
Right. You need leaders who are willing to walk the walk. And they empower their employees at all levels to get involved in DEI efforts. This could mean setting up employee resource groups, mentorship programs, or providing professional development opportunities.
So it's about making DEI everyone's responsibility, not just leaving it to a dedicated team or something.
Exactly. It's about making DEI part of the company's DNA, the way it operates every day.
That makes sense. I bet there are also companies that struggle with implementing DEI effectively. What are some common mistakes they should try to avoid?
One common mistake is treating DEI like a box to check. Like once it's done, you can forget about it. But as we talked about, DEI is an ongoing process, and it requires sustained effort and attention.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly. Another mistake is focusing too much on representation without actually changing the underlying systems and structures that cause inequality. It's not enough to just hire a diverse workforce. You have to build an environment where everyone feels supported, valued, and able to succeed.
So it's about fostering a culture of equity and inclusion where everyone has a fair shot.
Precisely. And it's important to remember that DEI isn't just about fairness. It can actually make a company more successful. When people feel valued and respected, they tend to be more engaged, productive, and come up with better ideas.
That makes sense. I'm starting to see how this all connects back to the Target boycott and the broader conversation about corporate social responsibility. Consumers are becoming more aware and demanding more from the companies they support.
Totally. And this is where the idea of voting with your wallet really comes into play. Consumers have the power to shape how companies behave by choosing to support the ones that align with their values. And on the flip side, they can choose to boycott companies that do things they find harmful or unethical.
It seems like the balance of power is shifting, you know? Consumers are getting more assertive and holding companies accountable.
I think that's a fair assessment. And social media has been a huge factor in this shift. It gives consumers a platform to voice their concerns and organize collective action like never before.
It's fascinating to watch how this is all playing out, and it makes you wonder what the future holds for the relationship between consumers and corporations, you know?
That's a great question. One thing's for sure, though. Companies can't just ignore what their customers want anymore. They have to pay attention to social issues, be more transparent about how they operate, and take responsibility for their impact on the world.
I'm curious to get your thoughts on something. We've talked about DEI and boycotts, but what about the role of the government in all this? Should they be more involved in regulating how businesses behave, or should we just let the free market figure things out?
Oh, that's a tough one. There are good arguments on both sides. Some people believe that the government needs to step in and set standards, especially when it comes to protecting people's rights. But others think government involvement just stifles innovation and creates unnecessary red tape.
It's like that balancing act we talked about earlier.
Exactly. It's always a challenge to find that balance between regulation and free enterprise. And the answer might be different depending on the specific issue,
So what can we do going forward? What are some potential ways to create a marketplace that's more fair and equitable?
I think open dialogue and collaboration are key. We need everyone at the table, businesses, consumers, government agencies, advocacy groups, to have honest conversations about the challenges and to explore solutions together.
So a multi-pronged approach, one that involves individual action, corporate responsibility, and government oversight.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. We all have a part to play in creating a more just and sustainable world.
Well said. This has been such an insightful conversation, and there's even more to discuss. Coming up, we'll explore the long-term effects of the Target boycott and what it all means for the future of corporate social responsibility. All right, so we've really been unpacking this Target boycott, haven't we? All the complexities from woke washing to consumer activism, even the role of the government. It's amazing how this one situation has blown up this whole conversation about the power dynamics between consumers and big corporations.
Yeah, it's definitely a sign of the times, Consumers are waking up to their influence, realizing they can actually drive change with their wallets.
It feels like companies are constantly under a microscope now, more than ever.
I think you're right. It's hard to get away with anything these days with social media, Everything gets amplified, everything comes to light.
Yeah, it's like companies can't just sweep stuff under the rug anymore. And that's why this Target thing is so huge. It's like a wake-up call for businesses everywhere, showing them that just talking about social issues isn't enough anymore.
Yeah, they need to actually walk the walk, have a real commitment to doing the right thing, even if it's not the most profitable thing.
Right, and this KR on N4 report we've been talking about, it really hammers that point home. They interviewed David Dolman, remember him? The guy leading this 40-day boycott. He's got that meeting with Target's board coming up, and he's so passionate about this. He truly believes that change is possible if enough people band together.
It is inspiring, seeing someone like David take a stand and really use his voice to try to make a difference. His story is a perfect example of how powerful consumer activism can be, especially when it gets amplified by social media and the news.
It shows that we're not powerless, even against these giant corporations.
Basically, we have choices,
Yeah.
and we can use our wallets to support the businesses that are actually doing good in the world.
Totally. And it's not just about buying or not buying. It's about having those conversations, with each other, with the companies themselves.
Yeah.
Asking tough questions, demanding they be more transparent, holding them accountable for what they do.
Couldn't agree more. So, where do we go from here? What does all of this mean for the future of corporate social responsibility?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
I think we're at a turning point. This Target boycott, it's just one example of a much bigger trend. Consumers are demanding more from the companies they support, and the businesses that don't adapt, they're going to get left behind.
So it's not just about being ethical anymore. It's about being smart, too.
Exactly. Companies that actually prioritize doing good, they're the ones that are going to succeed in the long run. They're the ones that are going to attract loyal customers, talented employees, and build strong relationships with their communities.
That makes a lot of sense. But what does genuine corporate social responsibility even look like? It's got to be more than just like slapping a rainbow on your logo during Pride Month, right?
Well, absolutely. It's about integrating social responsibility into every aspect of the business, from how they treat their workers to their impact on the environment to how they engage with the community. It's about being transparent and accountable, not just to their shareholders, but to everyone.
Walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Yeah, exactly that. And being willing to have those tough conversations, admit when they mess up, and always be trying to do better.
It's a lot, but it feels like it's what companies need to do to survive in today's world.
I think you're right. Consumers are getting smarter, and they're looking for companies that share their values.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into the Target boycott and everything it's brought up, what are your biggest takeaways from all this?
What really sticks with me is that we all have a role to play in making the world a better place. As consumers, we can make choices that influence how businesses behave. As citizens, we can hold those businesses and our government accountable. And as individuals, we need to keep educating ourselves, thinking critically, and using our voices to fight for what's right.
I love that. It's a reminder that we're not just along for the ride. We have power, and we can make a difference.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And it starts with conversations like this one, with asking the tough questions, challenging the status quo, and really trying to understand these complex issues.
Well said. Well, I think we've given everyone listening a lot to think about. It's been an incredible conversation, and we'll be back soon with another deep dive into a fascinating topic that's shaping our world. Until then, thanks for listening.